She agreed to a $50 million deal, 1 year of fake marriage to a billionaire whose heart was stone cold. But what started as a cold contract soon turned into something neither expected. When the act became real, everything changed. What happened next shocked them both. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked on today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. She signed the contract with steady hands, $50 million for 1 year of pretending to love a man whose frozen heart seemed beyond thawing, but neither of them knew that some performances become too real to fake. Aino Vatanen pressed her forehead against the frost-laced window of the metro train rattling through Helsinki's underground tunnels, watching her reflection fragment in the glass. Outside, February darkness had swallowed the city by 4 o'clock, turning the world into a negative image of itself: white snow, black sky, and the muted glow of streetlights that never quite reached the shadows between buildings. Her phone buzzed. Another message from my Lottie hospital. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. The words had been the same for 3 months. Payment overdue. €347,000 remaining balance. Please contact our billing department. €347,000. The number sat in her chest like a stone, growing heavier each day her father remained in the cancer ward, fighting a battle that cost more than a lifetime of her architectural drafts could ever cover. The train lurched to a stop at Kamppi station. Aino shouldered her worn leather portfolio and stepped onto the platform, joining the river of commuters flowing toward the exits. Above ground, Helsinki's winter pressed down with that peculiar Nordic darkness that felt less like nightfall and more like the absence of light ever existing at all. Her studio apartment in Kallio waited 6 blocks away, a 4th-floor walk-up that cost too much and heated too little, where she'd spend the evening like every evening, rationing bread and cheese, sketching buildings she'd never be commissioned to design, and pretending the cold radiating from the walls was somehow romantic rather than a reflection of how completely she'd failed. She'd been so careful. Studied so hard. Graduated top of her class from Aalto University. But careful didn't matter when your father's diagnosis came the same month you were starting your career. Careful didn't help when treatments weren't covered. Careful couldn't stop the debt from swallowing everything. Aino climbed the stairs to her apartment, breath misting in the unheated hallway. Inside, she flicked on the single lamp that illuminated her entire living space: bedroom, kitchen, office, all contained in 28 square meters. Her drafting table dominated the room, covered in sketches of clean lines and impossible dreams. She heated water for tea and was reaching for the last of her rye bread when her phone rang. Unknown number. Aino Vatanen. A woman's voice, crisp and professional. Speaking. My name is Lisa Mäkinen. I'm calling on behalf of Aleksi Lotti. He has a business proposition that might interest you. Aino's hand froze on the kettle. Aleksi Lotti. Everyone in Finland knew that name. The billionaire tech founder who'd built Nordic tech solutions from a university dorm room into a global empire. The man whose face appeared in business magazines beneath headlines about disruption and innovation. The man who, according to every profile she'd ever read, trusted no one and liked it that way. I think you have the wrong person, Aino said carefully. Ms. Vatanen, I have the right person. Mr. Lotti reviewed your architectural portfolio from the Aalto showcase last spring. He was impressed. A pause. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow. 10 o'clock at his office in Kiilaniemi. The address will be sent to your phone. This is about architecture. Another pause, longer this time. It's about an opportunity. One that would resolve your current financial situation. Aino's blood went cold. How do you know about my financial situation? Mr. Lotti is thorough. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I'd encourage you not to dismiss this, Ms. Vatanen. The opportunity is significant. The line went dead. Aino stood in her kitchen, kettle forgotten, while the February darkness pressed against her window and a text message arrived with an address in Espoo, where Finland's wealthiest built their glass towers above the bay. What would you do if a stranger knew your deepest secrets and offered you a way out? Across the city, 38 floors above Tuulenlahti Bay, Aleksi Lotti stood in his penthouse office and watched the lights of Helsinki spread below him like a circuit board, logical, ordered, predictable. He preferred it this way. High enough that people became patterns. removed enough that emotion stayed theoretical. The Vatanen woman agreed to the meeting, Lisa said from the doorway, tablet in hand, as efficient as the automated systems he'd built his fortune programming. Good. Alexei didn't turn from the window. Below, tiny figures hurried through the snow, lives full of messy complications he'd systematically eliminated from his own existence. And the contracts. Prepared. 1 year, $50 million transferred in stages, ironclad NDA, termination clauses clearly defined. Your lawyers have reviewed everything 3 times. Make it 4. Lisa nodded, unsurprised. Alexei Lotti checked everything 4 times. It was why his code never had bugs. Why his investments never failed. Why his relationships never got complicated. He didn't have them. The inheritance issue, he asked. Your grandmother's will is explicit. You must be married by your 35th birthday to inherit the estate and the controlling shares in the family trust. That's 7 months away. 7 months. His grandmother Helmi had been dead for 2 years, but she was still controlling his life from beyond the grave with that ridiculous clause. A man who builds empires but has no one to share them with has built nothing, she'd written in her will, as if sentiment could override logic. The estate itself, a sprawling property in Espoo worth €20 million, meant nothing to him. But the controlling shares of the family trust meant everything. Without them, his cousins could challenge his position at Nordic Tech. Could vote him out of the company he'd built. It could destroy everything because of a sentimental old woman's belief that marriage somehow equaled happiness. Fine. He'd give her marriage. A perfectly logical, completely controlled version that would satisfy the will's requirements without the messy complications of actual feeling. Why this woman? Lisa asked, and there was something careful in her voice. She'd been his assistant for 8 years. She knew when to push. She needs money desperately. Her father is dying, cancer, experimental treatments, costs approaching €500,000. She's proud, intelligent, and completely out of options. Alexei finally turned from the window. Which means she'll agree to terms and honor them. And her background check came back clean. No hidden agendas, no media connections, no reason to complicate this beyond the transaction it is. And when the year ends, we divorce quietly. She's financially secure. I have my inheritance and controlling shares. Everyone gets what they need. Lisa studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You've thought of everything. I always do. But that night, alone in his penthouse with its floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that cost more than most people's homes, Alexei stood in the darkness and felt the familiar hollow space where other people apparently kept their hearts. He'd learned early that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. His first business partner had stolen his code. His first serious girlfriend had been more interested in his growing bank account than anything else. Every subsequent relationship had proven the same theorem. People wanted something, and pretending otherwise was just inefficient. This arrangement with Aino Vatanen was honest in its dishonesty. A transaction. Clean. Controllable. Exactly how he preferred his life. The city glittered below him, and Alexei told himself he felt nothing about the woman arriving at his office tomorrow, the woman whose desperation matched his own in very different ways. He told himself this was just another problem being solved with elegant code. He almost believed it. The Nordic Tech Solutions headquarters rose from the Keilani EMI waterfront like a monument to Nordic minimalism, all glass and steel and the kind of deliberate emptiness that wealthy people called clean lines. Aino stood on the snow-dusted sidewalk, staring up at the building's 40 floors of reflective windows that turned the grey morning sky into a kaleidoscope of clouds. She dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a charcoal blazer and black trousers she'd bought for university interviews 5 years ago, now slightly too loose from the weight she'd lost eating 1 meal a day. Her boots had a scuff on the left toe she tried to polish away. Her portfolio bag, once expensive, now showed wear at the corners. She looked exactly like what she was, someone struggling to maintain the appearance of having their life together. Turn around, something whispered in her chest. Whatever this is, it's not about architecture. But the text message from the hospital that morning had been explicit. Final notice before transfer to collections agency. And collections agencies didn't care that your father was barely conscious, that the experimental treatment was working, that you just needed a little more time. Aino pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was a cathedral to success, marble floors that echoed footsteps like judgments, a living wall of Arctic ferns that must have cost a fortune to maintain, and silence so profound it felt aggressive. A receptionist with the kind of geometric haircut that screamed expensive salon looked up from her desk. Aino Vatanen. I have a 10 o'clock with. Mr. Lottie is expecting you. 38th floor. The receptionist's smile was professional and absent of warmth. Lisa will meet you at the elevator. The elevator was glass on 3 sides, offering a view of Helsinki spreading out as Aino rose through the building. She watched the city fall away, the frozen bay, the snow-covered parks, the ordinary world where people lived ordinary lives that didn't include meetings in towers above the clouds. The doors opened on the 38th floor, and Lisa Mäkinen was waiting, a woman in her 40s wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Aino's entire wardrobe, holding a tablet like a shield. Ms. Vatanen. Thank you for coming. Lisa's handshake was brief and cool. Before you meet with Mr. Lottie, I need you to sign this NDA. Whatever is discussed today remains confidential. Aino scanned the document. Standard non-disclosure language, but the penalty clause made her stomach drop, 500,000 euros for breach of confidentiality. I can't afford to violate this even accidentally, Aino said carefully. Then don't violate it. Lisa's expression didn't change. Mr. Lottie values discretion above almost everything. Aino signed. What choice did she have? She'd come this far. Lisa led her down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably had meaning Aino was too poor to understand, stopping at a door of frosted glass. Beyond it, Aino could see a figure standing at a window, tall, still, silhouetted against the morning light. He'll explain everything, Lisa said, and something in her voice might have been sympathy or warning. Then she opened the door, and Aino stepped into Alexi Lottie's office. The space was enormous and almost empty, a desk of pale wood that looked like it had never held clutter, 2 chairs, and windows that turned Helsinki into a toy city far below. Everything was white or grey or some shade in between, as if color was inefficient. And at the window stood Alexi Lottie himself. The photographs in business magazines hadn't quite captured him. He was tall, easily 190 centimeters, with dark hair starting to grey at the temples despite his relative youth. Sharp cheekbones. Eyes that blue-grey shade unique to the Nordic gene pool. He wore a black sweater and charcoal trousers, no tie, because billionaires didn't need to prove anything to anyone. But it was his stillness that struck her. He stood like a man who'd learned to take up space without apology, who'd mastered the art of control so thoroughly it had become his resting state. He turned, and those grey-blue eyes assessed her with the efficiency of a scanner cataloguing data. Ms. Vatanen. Please, sit. His voice was deep, unaccented English, the language of international business. Not warm, not cold. Neutral. Aino sat in one of the chairs facing his desk. Alexi took the other chair, not the power position behind the desk. A calculated move, she realized. Appearing to put them on equal footing, despite both knowing nothing about this, was equal. You're wondering why you're here, he said. Not a question. Your assistant mentioned an opportunity. Something about my portfolio. I'll be direct. Alexi leaned back slightly, fingers steepled in a gesture that belonged in a boardroom. I reviewed your thesis work from Aalto, the sustainable housing project for Arctic climates. Innovative. Practical. The kind of thinking that solves real problems. Despite everything, Aino felt a flush of pride. She'd spent 2 years on that project. But this isn't about architecture, Alexi continued, and the pride evaporated. Not directly. This is about a problem I have, and a solution that could benefit us both. What kind of problem? The kind that requires marriage. He said it the way someone might say the kind that requires a software update. Inconvenient but solvable. Aino blinked. I'm sorry. My grandmother's will stipulates that I must be married by my 35th birthday to inherit her estate and maintain controlling shares in the family trust. That's 7 months away. I need a wife. He paused. A temporary one. The office suddenly felt very cold despite the heated floors. You want to hire me to marry you? Yes. That's insane. It's practical. Alex's expression didn't change. You need money desperately. I need to satisfy an archaic legal requirement. We can help each other. Aino stood abruptly, portfolio bag clutched against her chest like armor. I thought you were offering me a job. Real work. Not, whatever this is. Sit down, Ms. Vatanen. No. I'm leaving. Your father has 3 months of treatment remaining. Maybe 4 if the experimental protocol continues showing positive results. Alex's voice remained neutral, factual, as if he were discussing stock prices. The hospital will transfer his debt to collections by the end of this week. Collections agencies don't care about partial payments or payment plans. They'll sue, win by default, and begin asset seizure. You'll lose your apartment. Your father will be transferred to standard care. Stop. Aino's hands were shaking. How do you know all this? I'm thorough. He gestured to the chair. Please. Sit. Let me explain what I'm offering. She should have left. Should have walked out and found another way, any other way. But the image of her father in that hospital bed, his hands so thin in hers, the machines breathing for him while the treatment worked its slow magic, that image kept her frozen. Slowly, Aino Saturday. Alexei pulled a folder from his desk drawer, actual paper, which somehow made it more real, and slid it across to her. The terms. 1 year of marriage. You'll live in my home, attend necessary public events as my wife, and maintain the appearance of a legitimate relationship. In exchange, your father's medical debt will be paid in full immediately, and you'll receive $50 million paid in stages, $20 million at signing, $15 million at 6 months, $15 million at the end of the contract. 50 million. The number was so large it became abstract, meaningless. More money than she could conceptualize. Why me? Aino heard herself ask. You need the money too much to complicate this with emotional expectations. You're intelligent enough to understand what this is. And you have no media connections or public profile that would draw unwanted attention. He paused. You're perfect because you're desperate and unknown. The honesty was almost worse than a lie would have been. Aino opened the folder. The contract was 40 pages of legal language, but certain phrases jumped out. Parties agreed to maintain separate bedrooms. No expectation of physical intimacy. Public appearances as required. Social media presence to be coordinated. Termination clause at 1 year with option for early dissolution if both parties agree. This is a business transaction, Alexei said. Nothing more. We both get what we need, and when the year ends, we divorce quietly. You'll be financially secure for life. I'll have satisfied the will's requirements. And if I develop feelings. The word tasted strange in this sterile office. You won't. Said with absolute certainty. I'm not a man who inspires affection, Ms. Vatanen. Ask anyone who's worked with me. I'm cold, controlling, and emotionally unavailable. This will be the easiest 50 million you'll ever earn because I require nothing from you except your presence and your discretion. Aino stared at him, this man who described his own emptiness like a product feature. Something sad flickered in her chest, not for herself, but for him. What kind of life had taught him to talk about himself this way? I need to think about it, she said. You have until 5 o'clock today. The wire transfer for your father's treatment will be initiated the moment you sign. He stood, ending the meeting with corporate efficiency. Lisa will take you to a conference room where you can review the contract in detail. My lawyers are available to answer questions. Aino stood on unsteady legs, folder clutched in her hands. At the door, she turned back. Alexei had returned to his window, silhouette against the clouds, and she had the strange sense that he was the loneliest person she'd ever seen. Mr. Lottie. He glanced over his shoulder. Why not just find someone who actually wants to marry you? For the first time, something flickered in his expression, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. Because wanting things leads to disappointment, Ms. Vatanen. Transactions are cleaner. 3 hours later, Aino sat in a conference room with Helsinki spread below her and a pen in her hand. The lawyers had answered every question. The contract was airtight. The money was real. She thought about her father telling her stories in their old house in Turku, before her mother died, before the cancer, when life had felt like something other than a series of financial catastrophes. Coulter, he'd called her. Gold. His treasure. What would he say about this? But he was unconscious. Couldn't say anything. And the treatment that might save him cost more than a lifetime of honest work could provide. Aino pulled out her phone and texted Lisa, I'll sign. But I want one modification to the contract. The response came 30 seconds later. What modification? I want the option to leave early if I'm unhappy. Not just if we both agree. If I want out, I can go. Keep the money I've been paid, no penalties. A longer pause. Then, Mr. Lottie agrees. Come to his office. When Aino returned to the 38th floor, Alexei was waiting with a modified contract. The addendum was there in black and white. Party A, Aino Vatanen, retains right to terminate agreement at any time with no financial penalty, retaining all compensation received to date of termination. Why did you agree to this? Aino asked. Because keeping you here against your will defeats the purpose. Alexei held out a pen. This only works if you choose to stay. Even if that choice is motivated by money. There was something almost respectful in that logic. A twisted kind of honor. Aino took the pen. The contract sat between them like a bridge over an abyss. Cross it, and everything changed. Stay here, and nothing changed except her father would die and she'd drown in debt. She thought of her mother, who'd taught her to be strong. Her father, who'd taught her to be kind. And herself, who'd learned through years of struggle that survival sometimes meant compromising your ideals. Is this a compromise or a surrender? She wondered. But she already knew the answer. She'd known it the moment she'd walked into this building. Aino signed her name, Aino Vatanen, soon to be Aino Lottie, and watched Alexei countersign with the same mechanical precision he probably brought to every business deal. The wire transfer will be complete within the hour, he said. We'll marry at the City Hall next Tuesday. Minimal ceremony, just witnesses. My family will be informed after. When do I move into your home? Wednesday. Lisa will coordinate. He slid a credit card across the table. For necessities. Clothes. Whatever you need. Aino stared at the black metal card with her name already embossed on it. The apartment in Callio felt very far away. 1 year, she said, and it sounded like a prison sentence. 1 year, Alexei agreed, and it sounded like a reprieve. They shook hands, a businesslike grip, neither warm nor cold, exactly the kind of touch appropriate for transaction this sterile. His hand was larger than hers, calloused in a way that surprised her. Even billionaires had rough edges, apparently. As Aino left his office for the second time that day, she glanced back once. Alexei had returned to his window, staring out at Helsinki with that same profound stillness. She wondered what it was like to live in a tower above the world, surrounded by everything money could buy, and still look that empty. She wondered if, 1 year from now, she'd understand. Tuesday arrived like a verdict. The Helsinki City Hall was a monument to functionalist architecture, clean lines, no ornament, built in the 1960s when Finland believed that stripping away decoration would somehow reveal essential truth. Aino stood in the marble hallway wearing a cream-colored dress she'd bought with Alexei's credit card, simple and elegant and nothing like a wedding dress, which was appropriate because this was nothing like a wedding. Alexei stood beside her in a dark suit, checking his phone. Lisa and 2 other Nordic Tech employees waited nearby, the required witnesses for this administrative task. The magistrate is ready, Lisa said, her voice echoing in the cold space. They filed into a small office where a woman in her 60s sat behind a desk, surrounded by filing cabinets and the accumulated paperwork of thousands of other couples who'd stood where Aino and Alexei now stood. But those other couples had probably been in love. Had probably chosen this. Alexei Lottie and Aino Vatanen. The magistrate looked up over reading glasses, her expression suggesting she'd done this so many times the words had lost all meaning. Yes, Alexei said. Yes, Aino echoed, her voice smaller than she'd intended. The ceremony took 7 minutes. There were no vows. Finnish civil ceremonies were efficient, focused on legal language about rights and responsibilities. The magistrate read from a document in Finnish, asked them each to confirm their consent, and then it was done. You may exchange rings if you wish, the magistrate said, already reaching for the marriage certificate to sign. Alexei produced 2 platinum bands from his jacket pocket. Elegant, simple, expensive. He'd thought of everything. He slid one onto Aino's finger, and she noticed his hand didn't shake at all. When she slid his ring on, her fingers trembled slightly, and she hated herself for the weakness. Congratulations, the magistrate said with the enthusiasm of someone congratulating people on completing their taxes. You're married. Married. The word sat strange in Aino's mouth, tasting of metal and money and decisions that couldn't be undone even if they could be terminated. Outside, snowflakes drifted down from a sky the color of ash. Alex's driver waited with a black Mercedes that probably cost more than most people's houses. "I'll have your belongings moved from Callio tomorrow," Alexei said, holding the car door open. "Lisa will coordinate." Aino slid into leather seats that heated immediately, wrapping her in artificial warmth. Alexei settled beside her, maintaining exactly 30 centimeters of distance between them, close enough to appear comfortable, far enough to make clear this changed nothing. As the car pulled away from City Hall, Aino looked at the ring on her finger. It caught the grey light and threw it back, beautiful and cold and exactly as fake as the marriage it represented. "Are you all right?" Alexei asked, and something in his voice suggested he actually wanted to know. Or maybe she was imagining warmth where none existed. "I just married a stranger for money," Aino said. "I'm not sure all right applies. We're not strangers. We're business partners. Business partners don't wear wedding rings. These do." He turned to his phone, already moving past the moment, already compartmentalizing this into another completed task. If you could rewrite one moment in your life, would you have the courage to change it, or would fear keep you on the same path? Before we continue, don't forget to smash that like button if you're enjoying what you're seeing. Your support means the world to me and helps this channel grow. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our uploads. We're building an amazing community here, and I don't want you to miss out on what's coming. And please, share this video with your friends, family, or anyone who would love this type of content. The more people we can bring into this community, the better it gets for everyone. Your engagement in the comments has been incredible, and I love reading every single one of your thoughts and theories. Keep them coming. Now, let's go in depth into the story. Aino watched Helsinki blur past the window, her city, now transformed into something unfamiliar by the lens of wealth filtering her view. She'd signed the contract, worn the dress, said the words. She'd sold a year of her life, and somewhere in a hospital room in Miloti, her father's treatment would continue uninterrupted, paid in full by a man who looked at marriage the way other people looked at software licenses. The Mercedes climbed into the hills of Espoo, where houses became estates and gates became necessary. When they stopped, it was in front of a modernist mansion of glass and stone perched above the frozen bay, beautiful, expensive, and utterly devoid of anything that looked like a home. "Welcome," Alexei said, and the word echoed with everything it lacked. "Welcome to your cage," Aino thought. "Welcome to the year you traded your freedom for your father's life. Welcome to learning whether some prices are too high even when you've already paid them." She followed her new husband into his fortress of solitude, platinum ring heavy on her finger, and wondered how long it would take before she forgot what her own life had felt like. 6 weeks after the wedding, Aino woke to light flooding through floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of aggressive brightness that comes from snow-reflecting winter sun. She'd stopped closing the blackout curtains. Something about this house demanded transparency, as if the glass walls were Alex's way of proving he had nothing to hide while simultaneously hiding everything. Her bedroom was 3 times the size of her entire Callio apartment. White walls, pale wood floors, minimalist furniture that looked like it had been selected by someone who'd never actually considered the concept of comfort. The bed was perfectly made on the side she hadn't slept on, because Aino still couldn't break the habit of sleeping close to one edge, as if she was still in that narrow single bed in her old life. Her old life. 6 weeks, and already it felt like something that had happened to someone else. She checked her phone. A text from the hospital. "Your father is awake and asking for you. Vitals strong. Dr. Lane says the treatment is working beyond expectations." Aino pressed the phone to her chest and allowed herself 30 seconds of tears, the grateful kind, the kind that came from a place she'd kept locked tight since signing that contract. Her father was going to live. Whatever else happened, whatever price she paid, that truth made everything else bearable. Another text, this one from Lisa, reminder, charity gala tonight, 7 p.m. Cocktail attire. Car will collect you both at 6:30. Mrs. Lottie, please remember, affectionate but not excessive. You've been married 6 weeks, still in the honeymoon phase. Mrs. Lottie. The name still felt like a costume. Aino showered in the marble bathroom with its heated floors and rainfall shower head, then dressed in jeans and a sweater, her own clothes, not the designer pieces now filling the walk-in closet. Alex's credit card could buy her a new wardrobe, but it couldn't make her feel like those clothes belonged to her. Downstairs, the house revealed itself in stages, a living room no one lived in, a dining room with a table that seated 12 but had never seen more than 2, a kitchen so pristine it looked like a showroom. The only signs of life were the coffee maker's red light and a single mug in the sink, Alex's morning routine, completed and departed before she woke. He was always gone before she woke. Home after she slept. They existed in the same space like ghosts haunting different hours. Except for the public appearances. Aino poured coffee and found the note on the counter, written in Alex's precise handwriting, meeting in Stockholm, back by 4. Ulla is preparing Karjalan piraka if you want lunch. Ulla was the housekeeper who came 3 times a week, a quiet woman in her 50s who treated Aino with the careful courtesy reserved for temporary fixtures. She knew what this marriage was. The whole staff probably knew. It was in the way they never quite met her eyes, the way they deferred to Alexei for every decision while treating Aino like an expensive vase, present but not particularly important. Aino took her coffee to the one room in the house that felt even remotely alive, Alex's study. He'd told her she could use it on the second day, a gesture that might have been kindness or might have been him optimizing unused space. The room had walls of books, actual books, not decorative spines, and a desk positioned to face the bay where ice was beginning to break apart into geometric chunks. She'd been sketching here. Her old drafting table from Callio now sat by the window, looking shabby against the room's expensive minimalism but somehow more real because of it. She'd been working on designs for affordable housing, the kind of project that would never make her rich but might make her useful. The kind of work that reminded her she'd once had dreams that weren't denominated in currency. Aino was deep into a drawing of modular units for Arctic construction when she heard the front door open. She glanced at her phone. 3:47. He was early. Aino. Alex's voice echoed through the house's open plan. Study. He appeared in the doorway still wearing his coat, snow melting on his shoulders. His eyes went to her drafting table, the sketches scattered across its surface, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or interest. You're working, he said. Is that not allowed? It's. He paused, searching for words with visible effort. Good. You should work. What are you designing? Housing modules for low-income families in Lapland. Sustainable, affordable, adaptable to extreme climate. Aino gestured at the sketches, suddenly self-conscious. It's just theoretical. No one's commissioned it. Alexei moved closer, studying her work with that focused intensity he probably brought to code reviews. He was quiet for so long she thought he'd lost interest. But then he asked, have you considered solar gain optimization for the roof angle? Winter sun is low. 22 degrees might capture more than your current 30. Aino blinked. You know about solar architecture. I know about efficiency. And physics. He pointed at another sketch. This wall thickness, you're accounting for thermal mass, but have you calculated the R value against actual Lapland winter temperatures? Might need another 5 centimeters of insulation. He was right. Both observations were exactly right. I'll adjust it, Aino said carefully, trying to reconcile this Alexei, engaged, analytical, actually present, with the man who communicated primarily through notes and scheduled appearances. Good. He stepped back, the moment of connection dissolving as quickly as it had formed. I need to prepare for tonight. The gala. Right. The performance. Something tightened in his jaw. It's not. He stopped. 6:30. Don't forget. He left before she could ask what it wasn't. The Finlandia Hall gleamed like a jewel box against the night, its white marble facade designed by Alvar Aalto to be a monument to Finnish modernism. Inside, Helsinki's elite gathered for the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, an event where Finland's wealthy proved they cared by writing checks large enough to appear in next week's society pages. Aino descended from the Mercedes wearing a deep blue gown that Lisa had selected, her hair swept up, the platinum ring on her finger catching chandelier light. She looked the part. That was the job. Alexei appeared beside her in a black tuxedo, offering his arm with the mechanical precision of a man following choreography. Ready. As I'll ever be. His hand settled at the small of her back, their agreed-upon gesture of intimacy, practiced but never quite natural. They entered together, and Aino felt the room's attention shift toward them like a physical force. There they are, someone murmured. The mysterious bride. Alexei had been Finland's most eligible bachelor for a decade, wealthy, brilliant, untouchable. His sudden marriage had sparked countless articles speculating about the unknown woman who'd captured the uncapturable. The truth, of course, was so much stranger than any speculation. Alexei. A man in his 60s approached, all enthusiasm and expensive cologne. And this must be the lovely Ano. I'm Marcus Salo, an old friend of the family. We were starting to think this one would never settle down. Marcus. Alexei's smile was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to be polite, distant enough to discourage intimacy. Ano. Marcus runs Salo Pharmaceuticals. Lovely to meet you, Ano said, deploying the script. Smile. Be gracious. Don't say anything interesting. How did you two meet? Marcus asked the inevitable question. Through work, Alexei said smoothly. Ano's an architect. She was consulting on one of our building projects. The lie rolled off his tongue like truth. They'd practiced this, along with a dozen other deflections designed to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything real. The evening proceeded in scripted segments: cocktails, dinner, speeches about sick children that made Ano's chest ache with the memory of hospital hallways. Through it all, she and Alexei maintained their performance, his hand finding hers, her laugh at his comments, the practiced ease of two people who appeared comfortable together. But between the public moments, in the spaces when no one was watching, they were strangers. Silent. Separate. Two actors stepping out of character between scenes. During dinner, Ano found herself seated next to Alexei's cousin, a sharp-eyed woman named Katerina who'd been studying Ano with undisguised skepticism since they'd arrived. So, Ano, Katerina said, fork poised over her salmon. You married my cousin quite suddenly. Very romantic. Very convenient. Katerina. Alexei's voice held a warning. I'm just making conversation. Katerina smiled, all teeth. It's just that Alexei has been single for so long, we'd all given up hope. And then suddenly, poof, a wife. Makes one wonder about the timing. Grandmother's will and all. The air at the table went taut. Ano felt Alexei's hand find her knee under the table, a warning or a reassurance, she wasn't sure which. I don't believe in long engagements, Ano said evenly. When you know, you know. And you knew. Katerina's eyes glittered. How decisive. We're very happy, Alexei said, and there was steel beneath the politeness. If you'll excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with. He stood, and Ano rose with him, grateful for the escape. As they moved through the crowd, his hand remained at her back, but this time it felt less like choreography and more like support. I'm sorry, he murmured when they reached a quieter corner. Katerina has been trying to challenge my position at Nordic Tech since grandmother died. She thinks if she can prove our marriage is fake, she'd be right. Yes. Alexei's jaw tightened. But she can't prove it. Not if we're careful. Is this what the whole year will be? Performing for suspicious relatives? Probably. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. You're good at this. Better than I expected. I'm a good liar, you mean? I mean you make it believable. When you laugh at my terrible jokes, when you touch my arm, it looks real. Feels real. He paused. Sometimes I almost forget it's not. The admission hung between them, dangerous in its honesty. Around them, the gala continued, music, laughter, the performance of wealth and charity. But in their quiet corner, something else was happening. Something neither of them had planned for. Alexei, Ano started, but then Lisa appeared with another couple who needed to meet them, and the moment dissolved into more handshakes, more smiles, more performance. 3 months after the wedding, the house had begun to change in small ways. Ano's coffee mug appeared next to Alexei's in the kitchen. Her sketches migrated from the study to the dining table. Her laughter, when she video called her father, now recovering rapidly, echoed through rooms designed for silence. And Alexei's schedule began to shift. He came home earlier. Stayed up later. Found reasons to be in whatever room she occupied. One evening in early May, as twilight stretched past 11 p.m. in Finland's endless spring light, Ano was in the kitchen attempting to make karjalanperaka from her mother's recipe. The traditional Karelian pastries were fighting back, the rye crust kept tearing, the rice filling refused to cooperate, and flour dusted every surface like snow. You're supposed to roll it thinner. Ano jumped. Alexei stood in the doorway, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. I know that, she said, gesturing at the massacred dough. Knowing and executing are different things. May I? He moved into the kitchen, and before Aino could protest, he'd washed his hands and taken over her rolling pin. His movements were efficient, precise, of course they were, and within 30 seconds he'd produced a perfectly thin circle of dough. How do you know how to make kajalan piraka? Aino asked, incredulous. My grandmother taught me. Before she decided I was too focused on computers and gave up. Something softened in his face. She used to say that a man who couldn't feed himself was a slave to his money. Wise woman. Stubborn woman. Like someone else I know. He glanced at her, and there was almost humor in his eyes. They worked in silence for a while, Alexei rolling dough, Aino filling and shaping the pastries. It was the most domestic thing they'd done, this collaboration, and it felt both comfortable and dangerous, like they were pretending to be something they weren't, except it didn't quite feel like pretending. Your father's doing well, Alexei said eventually, sliding a tray into the oven. I spoke with Dr. Lane yesterday. Aino froze. You called my father's doctor. I wanted to ensure he was receiving optimal care. Alexei, you can't just, she stopped, frustration and something else. Gratitude? Tangling in her chest. You don't need to do that. The treatment's paid for. That was the deal. I know what the deal was. He turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable. But he's your father. And he stopped, seeming to search for words. You're here. In my house. That makes his well-being relevant. Relevant, Aino repeated. Not important. Relevant. I don't know how to talk about emotions, Aino. I talk about what's logical. Relevant is what I know how to say. The honesty in that statement stole her breath. She looked at this man, billionaire, genius, so controlled that even his kindness came wrapped in corporate language, and saw for the first time how much effort it cost him to be human. Thank you, she said quietly, for checking on him. It's kind. Kind is inefficient. But there was something in his voice that contradicted the words. The oven timer beeped. Alexei removed the pastries, golden, perfect, filling the kitchen with the smell of her childhood. They stood side by side, surveying their work, and Aino had the strangest sense that something had shifted between them. Some invisible boundary had been crossed. We make a good team, Alexei said, and it sounded like he was surprised by the observation. In the kitchen, Aino clarified, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to. Yes. In the kitchen. He paused. And at the galas. And when Katerina interrogates you. And. He trailed off, as if realizing he was saying too much. They ate the kajalan piraka at the dining table, the one that had never seen use, and talked about things that weren't in the contract. Her childhood in Turku. His grandmother's stubbornness. The sustainable housing project she was still working on. His growing concerns about Nordic tech's expansion into AI ethics. Real things. Personal things. The kind of conversation that made Aino forget, for whole minutes at a time, that this marriage had an expiration date. When she stood to clear the dishes, Alexei touched her wrist, a light touch, there and gone, but it stopped her. Aino. His voice was careful. This is easier than I thought it would be. Having you here. Easier than living alone. Easier than I thought letting someone into my space would be. He released her wrist. I'm not good at this. At people. But you're. Again, that searching for words. You're not as disruptive as I expected. Aino laughed despite herself. That might be the worst compliment I've ever received. I meant, he stopped, something like frustration crossing his features. You're easy to be around. There. Is that better? Marginally. But she was smiling, and he was almost smiling, and the house felt less like a fortress and more like a space where two people were learning to exist together. It should have been a warning. This comfort, this ease. But Aino let herself ignore the danger because it had been so long since she'd felt comfortable anywhere, and Alexei's carefully structured world was becoming something that felt dangerously close to home. 4.5 months after the wedding. The spring had arrived in full force, transforming Finland into a green marvel of endless daylight. Aino spent her days working on the housing project, which had somehow attracted interest from a development company after Alexei accidentally mentioned it to a colleague. She spent her evenings with Alexei, in a routine that had settled into something almost natural. Dinners together. Conversations that stretched past midnight. His questions about her work, her questions about his. The way he'd started to smile more, the real smile that transformed his face from handsome to something that made her chest ache. The way she'd started to forget this was temporary. They were in the study one evening, Aino sketching while Alexei reviewed code on his laptop, when he suddenly closed the screen. "I want to show you something," he said. "Tomorrow. Can you clear your schedule?" "What is it?" "A surprise." He looked almost nervous, which was so unlike him that Aino agreed immediately. The next morning, they drove north from Espoo, through forests going green with new growth, until they reached a lake surrounded by birch trees. And there, on the shore, stood a cabin, not the glass and steel of his Espoo mansion, but a traditional Finnish summer cottage, painted red with white trim, smoke rising from a chimney that suggested recent use. "My grandmother's place," Alexei said as they walked toward it. "She left it to me separately from the estate. No strings. No marriage requirements. Just mine. It's beautiful. She built it with my grandfather. Before he died. Before she became obsessed with legacy and family continuity." He unlocked the door. "This is the only place I ever felt like I could be myself. No expectations. No performance." Inside, the cabin was warm and simple, a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen, a loft bedroom. Wood smoke and pine needles and old coffee. The accumulated smell of years of summers spent away from the world. "Why did you bring me here?" Aino asked. Alexei stood by the window, looking out at the lake. "Because you asked me once why I didn't just find someone who actually wanted to marry me. And I didn't answer honestly." Her heart started beating faster. "What's the honest answer?" "Because I'm afraid of people who want things from me." He turned to face her. "My business partner wanted my code. My first girlfriend wanted my money. Everyone who gets close wants something. So I stopped letting people close. And the contract marriage was safer," Aino said, understanding. "Because we both knew what we wanted from each other." "Yes." He moved toward her, and his expression was more open than she'd ever seen it. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a contract. "And I don't know what to do with that." The air between them felt electric, dangerous. Aino's breath caught. "Alexei. You don't disrupt my space, Aino. You make it feel like somewhere I want to be. You laugh at my terrible jokes, and you call me out when I'm being cold, and you've turned my sterile house into something that feels like." He paused, struggling. "Like home. Like what a home is supposed to be." "That's not in the contract," Aino whispered. "I know." He took another step closer. "Neither is the fact that I look for excuses to come home early. Or that I listen for your voice in the house. Or that when you smile at me, not the practice smile for the cameras, but the real one, I forget how to think in code. Have you ever felt yourself falling and had to choose whether to fight it or let go?" Aino's hands were shaking. "This is a bad idea. We agreed. We agreed to a business transaction. But this stopped being business somewhere between the Karjalampiraka and the midnight conversations and the way you look in the morning with your hair everywhere and no makeup and..." He stopped, jaw tight. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Aino. And I know that violates everything we agreed to. I know it's the exact complication we both wanted to avoid. But I don't know how to feel it." The world tilted. Aino pressed her hand against the cabin wall to steady herself. "You said you weren't a man who inspired affection." "I lied." His voice was raw. "I'm a man terrified of affection. Of wanting it. Of needing it. Because everyone I've ever let close has hurt me. But you," his voice cracked. "You make me want to try anyway." Aino closed her eyes. She should say no. Should remind him this was temporary. Should protect them both from the crash that would come when the year ended, and she left because that's what they'd agreed. But when she opened her eyes and saw him standing there, this brilliant, broken, carefully controlled man who just handed her his heart like it wasn't the most vulnerable thing he'd ever done, she couldn't say no. "I think I'm falling too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me." The distance between them disappeared. Alexei's hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone, and his eyes searched hers with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time. "Can we rewrite the contract?" he asked, voice barely audible. Can we make this real? I don't know how, Aino admitted. We started with a lie. Then we'll build truth on top of it. His forehead touched hers. Stay. Not because of the money. Not because of the contract. Stay because you want to. Because this, he gestured between them. Whatever this is becoming, it's the most real thing I've felt in years. And then he kissed her. It wasn't like the staged kiss they'd performed for cameras at a charity event last month. Brief, appropriate, empty. This was desperate and tender and tasted like every word they'd never said. His hands in her hair, her fingers clutching his shirt, both of them trying to communicate through touch what language had failed to capture. When they broke apart, breathing hard, Aino felt like she'd crossed a threshold she could never uncross. The contract ends in 3 months, she said. What happens then? We tear it up and start over. No transaction. Just us. Alex's hands framed her face. Or you leave, and I learn to live in an empty house again. But Aino, his voice broke. Please don't leave. She should have been cautious. Should have protected her heart. Should have remembered that men who bought wives maybe couldn't be trusted to love them for real. But she looked at Alexei, really looked at him, and saw past the billions and the defenses to the man who taught himself to cook kajalan piraka for a grandmother who gave up on him. The man who checked on her father's treatment without being asked. The man who was offering her not money, but something infinitely more valuable, his carefully guarded, rarely shared truth. I'm scared, Aino admitted. Me too. Alexei pulled her close, and she felt his heart hammering against her cheek. But I'm more scared of not trying. Of letting you go without fighting for this. They stayed in the cabin as the sun arced across the sky, talking, touching, building something new from the ruins of their transaction. And for the first time since signing that contract, Aino let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, some prices paid in desperation could transform into gifts freely given. Maybe some fake marriages could become real. Maybe some walls, no matter how high, could be climbed by someone patient enough to try. But 3 weeks later, everything shattered. Aino was at the hospital visiting her father, who was miraculously in remission, scheduled to be discharged next week, when Katerina appeared in the waiting room like a curse made flesh. Aino. How fortunate to run into you. Katerina's smile was all sharp edges. I've been meaning to have a chat. I have nothing to say to you. But I have something to say to you. Katerina settled into the chair beside her, uninvited. I know about the contract. Aino's blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. I've known Alexei his entire life. Did you really think he'd suddenly fall in love? Alexei doesn't fall in love. He solves problems. And you, Katerina's eyes raked over her. You're a very expensive solution to his inheritance problem. You're wrong. Am I? Tell me, how much is he paying you? 20 million? 30. Katerina leaned closer. Here's what's going to happen. I'm taking this information to the family trust lawyers. I'm challenging the validity of your marriage. And when I prove it's a sham, and I will prove it, Alexei loses everything. The inheritance, the controlling shares, possibly even Nordic Tech itself. You destroy your own cousin's company. I destroy a company being run by a man incapable of human connection. Yes. Katerina stood. Unless, of course, you'd like to save everyone the trouble and just leave now. I'm sure Alexei would compensate you for your inconvenience. She left, heels clicking against linoleum, and Aino sat frozen in the waiting room while her world collapsed around her. Because Katerina was right about one thing. The contract was real. The NDA she'd signed was ironclad. And if a legal challenge forced her to testify under oath about how the marriage began, she'd have to tell the truth. She'd destroy everything Alexei had built. Everything he'd spent his life creating. Unless she left first. Aino sat in the hospital waiting room long after Katerina left, staring at her hands. The platinum ring on her finger caught the fluorescent light, that perfect, expensive symbol of a transaction that had somehow transformed into the most real thing in her life. And now it was going to destroy everything. Her phone buzzed. Alexei, dinner tonight? I'm making salmon. Your favorite. 3 months ago, the message would have been formal, functional. Now it was warm, familiar, the kind of text sent by someone who knew her well enough to remember she preferred salmon to anything else. Someone who'd learned to communicate affection through food and small gestures because words still came hard to him. Someone she'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with. Aino's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could tell him about Katerina. About the threat. They could fight it together, hire better lawyers, weather the storm as a team. But what if they lost? Alexei would lose Nordic Tech, the company he'd built from nothing, the thing that defined him. His cousins would seize control, dismantle everything he'd created. And it would be her fault. Her presence, her contract, her desperate need for money that had started this entire charade. She thought about the man who'd kissed her in his grandmother's cabin 3 weeks ago. The man who'd looked at her with such raw vulnerability and said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." The man who'd finally, after years of self-imposed isolation, allowed himself to want something more than efficiency and control. If she stayed and they lost the legal battle, she'd destroy him. He'd lose everything, and every time he looked at her, he'd be reminded that love, the thing he'd been terrified to risk, had cost him his life's work. But if she left now, before Katerina could file her challenge, before the family trust lawyers started investigating, Alexei would keep everything. His company, his inheritance, his carefully constructed life. He'd be hurt, yes, but he'd survive. He'd survived worse. And eventually, he'd go back to the man he'd been before she disrupted his perfect isolation. Cold, controlled, safe. The thought of him alone in that glass house, returning to the emptiness he'd known before, made her chest ache with a physical pain. But the thought of destroying everything he'd built, of being the reason he lost Nordic Tech, was unbearable. Aino typed, "I need to talk to you. Can you come to the cabin? Tonight?" His response came immediately, "Of course. Is everything okay?" She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because nothing was okay, and after tonight, nothing would ever be okay again. The drive to Nuxio felt like a death march. Aino sat in her small used car. She'd refused to let Alexei's driver take her anywhere after the kiss in the cabin, needing some autonomy even as their lives tangled together, and watched the city give way to forest. The sun hung low on the horizon, that endless Nordic twilight that turned everything golden and sad. June had arrived with warmth and wildflowers, transforming Finland into the verdant paradise that made everyone forget the brutal darkness of winter. But Aino felt winter in her bones. Felt the cold settling in, permanent and unchangeable. Alexei's car was already at the cabin when she arrived, the Tesla he drove when he wanted privacy, when he wanted to feel like a person instead of a corporation. He was on the dock, standing perfectly still in the way he did when something was troubling him, trying to impose order on internal chaos through external stillness. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the wooden planks, and his smile, God, his smile, the real one he only gave her, nearly broke her resolve. "Hey," he said, moving toward her. "You sounded upset. What's?" "Don't." Aino held up a hand, stopping him before he could touch her. If he touched her, she'd shatter. "I need to talk, and you need to listen." Something shifted in his expression, wariness creeping in. "Aino, what's wrong?" "Katerina knows about the contract." The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples that would eventually become waves that would drown everything. Alexei went very still. "How? Does it matter?" "She knows. And she's going to challenge the marriage. Take it to the family trust lawyers, prove it's a sham, destroy your claim to the inheritance and the controlling shares." Aino's voice was remarkably steady, considering her entire world was ending. "She'll win, Alexei. Because it is a sham. Was a sham. The contract is real, the NDA is real, and if I'm forced to testify under oath, we'll fight it." His voice was hard, certain. "We'll hire the best lawyers in Finland. The marriage is legal, the contract doesn't matter. The contract matters if it proves we committed fraud to satisfy your grandmother's will. Intent matters. And our intent was always transaction." She forced herself to look at him. "We can't win this fight. Not with the truth on her side. Then we lie." Alexei moved toward her, desperate now. "We tell them we fell in love. That the contract was just a formality, protection for you in case things didn't work out. We make them believe. And when they depose Lisa, your lawyers, everyone who witnessed the actual agreement." Aino shook her head. "We can't outlie this, Alexei. Katerina has too much ammunition." "So what are you saying?" His voice had dropped dangerously low. I'm saying I need to leave. Now. Before she files her challenge. If I'm gone, if we divorce quietly, you can claim the marriage broke down naturally. No fraud, no contract, just a relationship that didn't work out. You keep everything. No. The word was flat, absolute. Absolutely not. Alexei. No, no. We're not doing this. We're not letting Katerina destroy what we've built. What we've built. The words exploded out of her. Alexei, what we built was based on a lie. It started with me signing away a year of my life for money. That's the foundation. And now that foundation is cracking, and we have to choose, do we let it destroy you, or do we end this before the damage becomes irreparable? You think losing you wouldn't be irreparable. His control was fracturing, voice rising. You think I can just go back to the way things were before? Before you filled my house with your laughter and your sketches and your terrible attempts at baking? Before you taught me that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as fundamentally broken as I thought. Tears were streaming down Ano's face now. I think you're stronger than you believe. I think you'll survive this. And I think Nordic Tech, your life's work, is worth more than a relationship that started as a transaction. Don't do that. Don't diminish what we have by reducing it to how it started. Alexei grabbed her shoulders, not roughly, but desperately, like she was water slipping through his fingers. Yes, we started with a contract. But we became something real. You know that. I know you know that. Real doesn't matter if it costs you everything. Ano pulled away from his grip, needing distance to stay strong. I won't be the reason you lose Nordic Tech. I won't be the reason you spend the rest of your life watching your cousins destroy what you built. I love you too much to let that happen. The words hung in the air, the first time either of them had said it plainly, without qualifiers or fear. I love you. 3 words that should have been a beginning but sounded like an ending. Then stay, Alexei said, and his voice cracked completely. If you love me, stay. Fight with me. Let me protect what we have. You can't protect this. Don't you understand? Katerina is right. We committed fraud. Maybe not in the legal sense, maybe the marriage is technically valid, but we manipulated your grandmother's will. We took something meant to ensure you'd find love and turned it into a business transaction. And when that comes out, when it inevitably comes out, you lose everything. Your company, your reputation, possibly your freedom if they decide to prosecute. I don't care. He said it with such finality, such absolute certainty, that it stopped her breath. I don't care about any of it if losing it means losing you. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in my life. Alexei's hands fisted at his sides, his carefully maintained control completely shattered. I spent 34 years building walls, Ano. Keeping people out, staying safe, telling myself that isolation was strength. And then you climbed into my fortress with your stubborn pride and your compassion and your refusal to let me hide behind cold efficiency. You made me human again. You made me want to be human again. Alexei, please. No. You don't get to tell me what I care about, what I can afford to lose. You don't get to make that choice for me. He moved closer, and the anguish in his eyes was unbearable. I'll walk away from Nordic Tech. I'll give Katerina everything, the company, the inheritance, all of it. But I won't give up you. I won't go back to that empty house and pretend I'm fine alone when I know what it's like to come home to you. Ano pressed her hands against her chest, trying to hold herself together. If you give up Nordic Tech, you'll resent me. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but eventually. You'll look at me and see everything you sacrificed, everything you lost because you were too stubborn to let me go. Then let me be stubborn. His voice dropped to a whisper. Let me choose you. I can't. The words ripped out of her. I can't let you destroy your life for me. I can't be that person, Alexei. I can't be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. Because when this started, I was desperate enough to take your money, but I won't be selfish enough to take your future. She pulled the platinum ring off her finger, that perfect, expensive symbol, and held it out to him. I'm leaving. Tonight. The contract had a clause that let me walk away. So I'm walking away. You keep Nordic Tech, you keep your life, and eventually you'll remember that you were fine before I showed up. You'll go back to being fine. I don't want to be fine. Alexi's voice was raw, broken in a way she'd never heard. I want to be happy. And I only know how to be happy with you. Then learn again. Aino pressed the ring into his hand, forcing his fingers to close around it. Learn to be happy alone, or learn to be happy with someone new. Someone who doesn't come with a fraud investigation attached. But let me go, Alexi. Please. Let me save you this one time. She turned toward her car, and his hand caught her wrist, that same light touch that had stopped her the night they made Kajalamparaka together. But this time it wasn't a question. It was a plea. Aino. Don't do this. Don't walk away from us. She looked back at him one last time. This brilliant, damaged man who'd learned to risk his heart and was now paying the price for that bravery. The sunset cast him in gold, making him look like something out of a painting. Something beautiful and untouchable and so far away despite their proximity. I love you, she said again, needing him to understand. That's why I'm leaving. Because love means protecting the person you love, even when it destroys you to do it. That's not love, Alexi said, and there was something like anger beneath the pain now. That's martyrdom. You're making yourself the hero of a tragedy when we could just fight together. And when we lose, when Katerina wins and you're left with nothing, will you still think fighting was worth it? Yes. No hesitation. 1,000 times yes. Because a life with you, even a life where I've lost everything else, is worth more than a life of controlled isolation where I've kept everything but feel nothing. The certainty in his voice almost broke her. Almost made her stay. Almost made her believe they could survive this together. But Aino thought about the hospital bills paid in full. About her father, alive and recovering, because Alexi had offered her $50 million for a year of pretending. About the debt she owed, not the financial kind, but the deeper obligation that came from having your life saved by someone else's transaction. She couldn't let him sacrifice everything for her. Not when she'd already taken so much. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Alexi. But this is the only way I know how to love you right. She pulled her wrist from his grip and walked to her car on legs that felt like they might collapse. Behind her, she heard him call her name once more, Aino. And the sound was so full of anguish it nearly stopped her. Nearly. But she got in the car, started the engine, and drove away from the cabin. In the rearview mirror, she watched Alexi standing on the dock, silhouetted against the sunset, ring clutched in his hand. Watching her leave. Not chasing her, because even in his desperation he respected her choice. That respect made it so much harder. Aino drove until she couldn't see the cabin anymore, then pulled over onto a forest road and broke down completely. Great heaving sobs that felt like they might tear her apart. Because she'd done the right thing. She knew she'd done the right thing. But the right thing felt like dying from the inside out. Her phone buzzed. Alexi, please come back. We can figure this out. Please. Then, I love you. That doesn't have an expiration date just because you left. Then, I'm not giving up on us. Even if you have. Aino turned her phone off and sat in the gathering darkness, surrounded by pine trees and silence and the wreckage of the best thing that had ever happened to her. She'd saved him from Katerina's challenge. Saved his company. Saved his future. But she destroyed them both in the process. And somehow, that was supposed to be love. 2 weeks later, Aino was back in her father's house in Turku, the small 2-bedroom where she'd grown up, now filled with medical equipment and the quiet sounds of recovery. Her father was home from the hospital, weak but alive, sitting in his favorite chair by the window overlooking their small garden. Coulter, he said, using his old nickname for her. You've been crying again. I'm fine, ISA. You're heartbroken. There's a difference. He gestured to the chair beside him. Sit. Talk to your old father. Aino sat, pulling her knees to her chest like she used to as a child. Outside, summer bloomed in defiance of her internal winter. I made a mistake, she said quietly. I thought I was protecting someone I love, but maybe I was just running away. From what? From the possibility that love could actually work. That something good could happen without a price attached. She wiped at her eyes. I started out pretending to love someone for money. And when it became real, when he became real to me, I convinced myself it couldn't last. That the foundation was too broken to build anything permanent. And was it? Her father asked gently. I don't know. Aino's voice cracked. But I didn't give us a chance to find out. I decided for both of us. And now he's alone in his glass house, and I'm here, and we're both. She couldn't finish the sentence. Miserable. Yes. Her father was quiet for a long moment, then said, when your mother was sick, I wanted to protect her from everything. The pain, the fear, the knowledge of how little time we had left. I tried to make decisions for her, to shoulder it all myself. And you know what she told me. Aino shook her head. She said, you're not protecting me. You're robbing me of the chance to face this on my own terms, with you beside me. That's not love, that's control dressed up as sacrifice. He reached over and took Aino's hand. Maybe you weren't protecting him, Coulter. Maybe you were protecting yourself from the possibility of losing everything if you risked it all. The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. She told herself she was saving Alexei, but maybe she'd just been terrified that if they fought together and lost, she'd lose not just him but the hope that love could be worth the risk. I can't go back, Aino whispered. I already left. I already destroyed it. Can't? Or won't? Her father squeezed her hand. You've always been so strong, so independent. But strength isn't refusing help, Coulter. Strength is admitting when you need someone, and letting them need you back. Aino's phone, which she'd finally turned back on that morning, sat on the side table. In the 2 weeks since she'd left, Alexei had sent 47 messages. She'd read none of them, terrified of what they'd say. Terrified they'd make her want to go back. Terrified they'd confirm she'd been right to leave. Read them, her father said, nodding at the phone. Whatever he said. You owe him that much. And you owe yourself the chance to know whether you walked away from something broken or something worth fighting for. With shaking hands, Aino picked up her phone and opened Alexei's messages. The first, please come back. We can figure this out. Please. The second, I love you. That doesn't have an expiration date just because you left. The third, I'm not giving up on us. Even if you have. Then more, spanning 2 weeks. I hired new lawyers. They think we can beat Katerina's challenge. Come home and we'll fight this together. I miss you. The house is too quiet. I made Kajalan Piraka. They were terrible. Apparently, I only know how to make them when you're there to help. Your father called me. He's doing well. He misses you, too. Day 5 without you. I've realized something. You were right that the contract was a lie. But what we became was truth. And I'd rather lose everything defending that truth than keep everything by pretending it didn't exist. I told Katerina to go ahead and challenge the marriage. Let her lawyers come. Let them investigate. I'm not hiding from this anymore. I'm not hiding from what we had. Day 10. I keep expecting to hear your voice in the house. Keep thinking you'll walk into the study with coffee and tell me my code is inefficient. Keep hoping. I love you. Present tense. Not past. Not conditional. Just, I love you. And the most recent, sent this morning. Aino, I know you think leaving was protecting me. But you're wrong. The only thing that could destroy me is living without you and pretending I'm fine with it. So here's what I'm doing. I'm fighting Katerina. I'm calling her bluff. And I'm hoping, God, I'm hoping, that you'll come back and fight with me. Not because I need you to save me. But because we're better together than we ever were apart. Come home. Please. Let me love you the way you deserve. Completely, honestly, and without counting the cost. Aino read the messages twice, then a third time, tears blurring the words. This man, this careful, controlled man who'd spent his life avoiding risk, was risking everything. For her. For them. When the person you love is willing to lose everything for you, do you honor that sacrifice by leaving, or by staying and fighting beside them? ISA, Aino said, voice shaking. I need to go to Helsinki. Her father smiled, the first real smile she'd seen since his diagnosis. Then go, Coulter. Go fight for what's yours. The drive back to Espoo felt like traveling through time, every kilometer bringing her closer to either redemption or ruin. Aino drove too fast, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, Alexei's words echoing in her mind. We're better together than we ever were apart. It was almost midnight when she reached the house. His house, their house, the glass fortress that had somehow become home. All the lights were on, blazing against the darkness, as if he couldn't stand the emptiness and needed to fill it with brightness. Aino parked and sat for a moment, gathering courage. She'd left to protect him. Come back to what? Tell him she'd been wrong? Tell him she was terrified but willing to try? Tell him that 2 weeks without him had been more painful than any sacrifice she'd thought she was making? Before she could decide, the front door opened. And there was Alexei, standing in the doorway like he'd been waiting every night since she left, hoping this would be the night she came home. He looked terrible. His hair was disheveled, his clothes rumpled, his eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. He looked nothing like the controlled, polished billionaire who'd offered her $50 million for a fake marriage 5 months ago. He looked human. He looked heartbroken. He looked exactly how she felt. Aino. Just her name, but it held everything: question, hope, fear, love. She got out of the car on unsteady legs. I read your messages. All of them. All 47. There were 48. I sent another while you were driving. He didn't move from the doorway, as if afraid that approaching her would spook her into leaving again. Number 48 said, I see your car in the driveway and I'm terrified this is a dream. Despite everything, Aino almost smiled. It's not a dream. Then why are you here? Because my father told me I was protecting myself, not you. Because 2 weeks without you made me realize that losing you, really losing you, would hurt more than any legal battle ever could. Because I was wrong, Alexei. I was so wrong to leave. Something cracked in his expression, relief so profound it looked like pain. You weren't wrong to want to protect me. You were wrong to think I needed protecting more than I needed you. I'm scared, Aino admitted. Scared that staying will cost you everything. Scared that we'll fight Katerina and lose. Scared that this thing between us, this real thing that grew from a fake beginning, won't be strong enough to survive what's coming. I'm scared too. Alexei finally moved, stepping off the threshold toward her. I'm terrified. But I'm more terrified of the alternative. Of playing it safe. Of returning to the empty life I had before you disrupted it. He stopped an arm's length away. I don't want safe anymore, Aino. I want you. Even if it costs everything. Especially if it costs everything, because that's when it means the most. What if we lose? Then we lose together. And we rebuild together. And maybe we end up in a small apartment instead of this glass house. And maybe I'm running a startup from a laptop instead of an empire from a tower, but you'll be there. And that makes it worth it. Aino closed the distance between them, hands coming up to frame his face. I love you. Not the transaction version. Not the business partner. You. The man who makes terrible Karjalan Piraka and sends 48 text messages and is willing to burn down his empire rather than let me go. Good, Alexei said, and then he kissed her, desperate and relieved and full of everything they'd almost lost. His arms wrapped around her like he'd never let go, and Aino kissed him back with all the fear and hope and love that had been building for 2 weeks of separation. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. So what now? How do we fight this? Together. Alexei pulled the platinum ring from his pocket. He'd been carrying it, she realized, waiting for this moment. Let me do this properly. Not with a contract. Not with a transaction. With a choice. He didn't kneel, there were past grand gestures, living in the messy reality of imperfect love, but he held out the ring like an offering. Aino Vatanen. Will you marry me? For real this time. No money, no contract, no expiration date. Just us, choosing each other, whatever comes next. Aino looked at the ring, then at him. This man who'd learned to risk everything for her, who'd chosen love over safety, who was offering her not security but partnership in facing whatever came. Yes, she said, and slid the ring back onto her finger where it belonged. Yes to all of it. The fight, the risk, the terrifying possibility that we might lose everything but still have each other. That's all I needed to hear. Alexei pulled her close again, and this time the kiss was softer, deeper, a promise instead of a relief. Welcome home. They stood in the driveway as midnight turned to morning, holding each other, and Aino felt something shift in her chest, not the cold grip of fear, but the warm expansion of hope. They had battles ahead. Katerina wouldn't give up easily. The lawyers would dig, the family would question, and the truth about their beginning might cost them dearly. But they'd face it together. And that, Aino realized, was worth more than $50 million. Worth more than safety. Worth more than anything except the man in her arms who'd taught her that sometimes the riskiest thing was also the rightest thing. Sometimes love meant running away to protect someone. But more often, it meant running back to fight beside them. 3 weeks later, the conference room on the 40th floor of Helsinki's most prestigious law firm felt like a courtroom, even though this wasn't a trial. Not yet. This was the Family Trust Board meeting. 12 members, all relatives or representatives of the Lottie estate, gathered to hear Katarina's formal challenge to Alexi's inheritance claim. Aino sat beside Alexei at the long mahogany table, their hands clasped beneath the table where no one could see. She wore a navy suit that Lisa had helped her select. Professional, confident, the armor of someone who belonged in rooms like this even if she'd grown up in a cramped apartment in Turku. Across from them sat Katarina, flanked by her lawyers, 3 of them, all sharp-eyed and expensive. She looked like victory itself, assured and cold. "Thank you all for coming," said Mikael Rontanen, the trust's head administrator, a grey-haired man in his 70s who'd known Alexi's grandmother personally. "We're here to address Ms. Katarina Lottie's challenge to Alexei Lottie's inheritance claim under the terms of Helmi Lottie's will." "Before we begin," Alexei said, his voice steady, "I'd like to make a statement." Mikael nodded. "Proceed." Alexei stood, and Aino felt his hand squeeze hers once before letting go. He looked around the table, at his cousins, at the lawyers, at the faces of people who'd known him his entire life but never really known him at all. "My grandmother left me her estate and controlling shares in the family trust on the condition that I be married by my 35th birthday. The stated reason was that she believed a man without family was an incomplete man. She wanted me to know love, connection, partnership, all the things she valued and worried I was incapable of finding." He paused, and Aino saw him gather himself for what came next. She was right to worry. I'd spent years building walls, keeping people at arm's length, convinced that isolation was safer than vulnerability. So when I learned about the marriage requirement, I did what I always do. I treated it as a problem to solve with the most efficient solution possible. Katarina leaned forward, scenting blood. "I hired Aino Vatanen to marry me," Alexei continued, and the room went silent. "I offered her $50 million for 1 year of a contractual marriage that would satisfy the will's requirements without requiring any actual emotional investment from either of us. It was, by every measure, a business transaction designed to circumvent my grandmother's intent while technically satisfying her conditions." Katarina's lawyer was already standing. "Then you admit to fraud." "I'm not finished." Alexei's voice cut through the interruption. "Yes, I entered into a fraudulent marriage. But something my grandmother understood, something I was too blind to see, is that you can't fake proximity without consequences. You can't live with someone, share space with them, witness their humanity day after day, without being changed by it." He turned to look at Aino, and the love in his eyes was so naked, so completely unhidden, that she felt tears prick her own. Aino wasn't supposed to matter. She was supposed to be a solution, a placeholder, someone who'd take the money and fulfill the terms and leave when the year ended. But she made coffee appear next to mine in the morning. She filled my silent house with laughter and music and the sound of someone actually living instead of just existing. She called me out when I was being cold, praised me when I managed basic human kindness, and refused to let me hide behind corporate efficiency. His voice softened. "She taught me that my grandmother was right. I was incomplete. Not because I lacked a wife, but because I'd forgotten how to be vulnerable. How to need someone. How to let someone need me back." Alexei pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table to Mikael. "This is the original contract Aino signed. Along with documentation of every payment made, every term agreed to, and a full accounting of how the arrangement began. I'm providing it voluntarily because I won't build our future on lies." "Alexei," Aino started, but he shook his head gently. "Let me finish." He turned back to the board. "Yes, I manipulated my grandmother's will. Yes, I treated marriage as a transaction. I violated the spirit of her wishes even while satisfying the letter of them. And if this board decides that means I forfeit the inheritance and the controlling shares, I'll accept that decision." Katarina was smiling now, sensing victory. "But," Alexei continued, "I want you to know what happened after the contract was signed. How a transaction became something real. How the woman I hired became my best friend, my partner, the person who makes me want to be better than my worst instincts. How somewhere between the fake wedding and the public appearances and the carefully maintained distance, I fell completely in love with my own wife." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small stack of papers. These are letters. Written by Aino over the past 6 months. She didn't know I kept them. Notes she left around the house, reminders about my father-in-law's treatment, shopping lists with little jokes in the margins. Evidence of a life actually lived together, not just performed for cameras. Alexei distributed copies around the table. Aino's breath caught as she recognized her own handwriting. The grocery list where she'd drawn a smiley face next to salmon, Alexei's favorite. The note reminding him about a doctor's appointment for her father with a PS that said thank you for caring. The sketch she'd left on his desk of the cabin with our happy place written underneath. Small things. Intimate things. The accumulated evidence of 2 people building a life together. My grandmother wanted me to know love, Alexei said quietly. She got her wish. Just not in the way either of us expected. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if love that started as fraud can count as fulfilling her intent. But I know that what Aino and I have now is real. Is worth fighting for. Is worth more to me than any inheritance or controlling shares. He sat down, reaching for Aino's hand again, and she gripped it hard enough to hurt. Katerina's lawyer stood immediately. This is a touching story, but it doesn't change the fundamental facts. Mr. Lottie admits to entering a fraudulent marriage for the explicit purpose of manipulating the will's conditions. The contract is clear evidence of intent. Whatever feelings may have developed afterward are irrelevant. Are they? The question came from Mikhail, who'd been reading through the papers Alexei had distributed. Ms. Vatanen, may I ask you something? Aino's heart hammered. Of course. When did you fall in love with Alexei? The room waited. This was it, the moment where she could lie, could claim it was love at first sight, could try to rewrite history in their favor. Or she could tell the truth and let the consequences fall where they would. Aino stood, legs unsteady but voice clear. The night we made Karjalan Piraka together. About 6 weeks after the wedding. Katerina's lawyer pounced. So you admit there was no love at the time of marriage? There was no love at the time of marriage, Aino agreed. There was desperation on my part. My father was dying, and I needed money I couldn't earn any other way. And there was calculation on Alexei's part. He needed to satisfy a legal requirement while maintaining emotional distance. We were both using each other. Both getting something we needed from a transaction that had nothing to do with affection. She paused, gathering courage. But Alexei's grandmother was wiser than either of us. She knew that marriage isn't just about the wedding day. It's about what you build afterward. It's about the choice you make every single day to stay, to try, to let someone see you at your worst and choose you anyway. Aino looked at the board members, at these people who held her future in their hands. I didn't love Alexei when I signed that contract. But I love him now. Completely. Not because of his money. I would give back every cent if it meant we could just be together without this hanging over us. I love him because he checks on my father's treatment without being asked. Because he makes terrible jokes and then looks so proud when I laugh at them. Because he spent his whole life protecting himself from being hurt, and he chose to risk that hurt for me. She turned to Alexei, and her voice softened. I love him because when I tried to leave to protect him, he told me he'd rather lose everything than lose us. Because he values what we've built together more than any inheritance. Because he taught me that sometimes the bravest thing isn't running away to save someone, it's staying and fighting beside them. This is all very moving, Katerina said coldly, but it doesn't address the fundamental fraud. Actually, Mikhail interrupted, it might. He was reading something in the file, Helmi's original will, Aino realized. The exact wording of Helmi's marriage requirement is worth examining. It states, Alexei must be married by his 35th birthday, and must remain married for a minimum of 1 year, to inherit. This condition exists to ensure that Alexei understands the value of commitment, partnership, and emotional vulnerability, qualities essential for a leader who will steward not just wealth, but family legacy. Mikhail looked up. The will doesn't specify that the marriage must begin with love. Only that it demonstrates commitment, partnership, and emotional vulnerability. And from what I've seen today, both in Alexei's admission and in the evidence of your life together, those qualities are present. Perhaps not at the beginning, but certainly now. That's a generous interpretation, Katerina's lawyer argued. The spirit of the requirement clearly intended. The spirit of the requirement, Mikhail said firmly, was for Alexei to learn to be vulnerable, to open himself to connection, to understand that true leadership requires emotional intelligence, not just strategic thinking. And by his own admission, that's exactly what happened. Whether he intended it to happen is irrelevant. The outcome satisfied Helmi's true purpose. He looked at Alexei and Aino. Helmi was my friend for 40 years. I knew what she hoped this requirement would accomplish. She wasn't naive. She knew Alexei might try to manipulate it. But she believed that the act of marriage itself, of committing to another person even artificially, would change him. Force him to grow. And she was right. Katerina stood abruptly. This is absurd. You're letting sentiment override clear evidence of fraud. I'm letting wisdom override technicality, Mikhail said. Helmi wanted Alexei to grow. He grew. She wanted him to learn vulnerability. He learned it. She wanted him to understand partnership. Look at them, he gestured at Alexei and Aino, hands clasped, united. And tell me he hasn't learned that lesson. Mikhail turned to the rest of the board. I propose we vote on whether Alexei has satisfied the spirit of Helmi's requirement, regardless of how the marriage began. All in favor. The room held its breath. Then, one by one, hands rose. Some immediately, some reluctantly, but rising nonetheless. 8 of the 12 board members voted in favor. It was enough. The challenge is denied, Mikhail announced. Alexei retains his inheritance and controlling shares. This matter is closed. Katerina's face went white with fury. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Mikhail's voice was steel. Accept the decision with grace, Katerina, or contest it in court and lose even more spectacularly. Helmi's will has been satisfied. Not in the way Alexei intended, perhaps, but in the way Helmi hoped. That's what matters. The meeting dissolved into legal murmurs and paper shuffling. Alexei turned to Aino, and she saw tears in his eyes, actual tears from this man who'd spent his life believing emotion was weakness. We won, he whispered, like he couldn't quite believe it. We won, Aino confirmed, and then they were both laughing and crying and holding each other while lawyers packed briefcases and Katerina stormed out with her dignity in tatters. They'd won. Not because they'd hidden the truth, but because they'd exposed it. Not because they'd manipulated the system, but because they'd proven that even manipulations could transform into something real. They'd won because love, it turned out, was stronger than contracts. 6 months later, the small church in Porvoo was nothing like the sterile Helsinki city hall where they'd first been married. It was old, built in the 1400s, all worn wood and stained glass and the accumulated prayers of centuries. Snow fell softly outside, transforming the medieval town into something from a fairy tale. Inside, 50 people gathered, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Aino's father, strong and healthy, tears streaming down his face. Lisa, who'd become an unexpected friend. Mikhail Rontanen, who'd given them a chance. Even a few of Alexei's cousins who'd voted in their favor. And at the altar, Alexei waited. He wore a dark suit, simple and elegant, and his eyes never left the church entrance. Waiting for her. Always waiting for her, just like he'd waited that night when she'd driven back from Turku, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. Aino walked down the aisle alone. No one to give her away, because she was giving herself. Choosing this. Choosing him. Choosing them. Her dress was cream-colored lace, vintage, bought from a small boutique in Porvoo's old town. Simple. Real. Nothing like a fairy tale, everything like truth. When she reached Alexei, he took her hands and she saw that his were shaking slightly. Even now, even after everything, vulnerability still cost him effort. But he did it anyway. For her. For them. The ceremony was in Finnish this time. Proper vows, spoken in their language, in a church that had witnessed centuries of promises. When the pastor asked if they took each other, their yes echoed off stone walls. I have something to add, Alexei said suddenly, and the pastor blinked in surprise but nodded. Alexei turned to face Aino fully. The first time we did this, I thought I was solving a problem. I thought marriage was just a legal requirement, and you were just a solution. I was wrong about everything. His voice strengthened. You're not a solution, Aino. You're the question I didn't know I needed to ask. You're the disruption I thought I wanted to avoid. You're the mess and the warmth and the laughter that turned my fortress into a home. And I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you, not because a contract says I have to, not because a will requires it, but because every day with you is better than any day without you. Aino's vision blurred with tears. I didn't prepare anything. Then just tell me the truth, Alexei said softly. That's all I need. She took a shaky breath. The truth is, I signed a contract with you believing I was trading a year of my life for my father's survival. And I was willing to make that trade because love for family is easy. It's automatic, instinctive. But what I found with you was harder and better and more terrifying. I found the love that's a choice. The kind you make every morning when you wake up and decide to try again. To be vulnerable again. To risk hurt again. She squeezed his hands. You gave me $50 million for a fake marriage. But you've given me something infinitely more valuable since then. The knowledge that I'm brave enough to stay when running would be easier. That I can be chosen not for what I provide, but for who I am. That love isn't a transaction, it's a transformation. I love you, Alexei said, and his voice cracked. Not conditionally. Not temporarily. Just, completely. I love you, Aino echoed. Forever. For real this time. They kissed before the pastor could officially pronounce them married. Impulsive, imperfect, entirely them. And the church erupted in applause, this small gathering of people who'd watched them fight for each other and win. At the reception in a nearby restaurant, Aino's father pulled her aside. Coulter, I'm proud of you. For what? For being brave enough to accept help when you needed it. Brave enough to fall in love. And brave enough to fight for that love instead of protecting yourself from it. He touched her cheek gently. Your mother would be so proud too. You became the woman we always hoped you'd be. Strong, yes, but also willing to need someone. That's the hardest strength of all. Later, as snow continued to fall and the evening stretched into the kind of celebration that happens when people genuinely care about the couple being honored, Alexei found Aino on the restaurant's small balcony overlooking the Porvoo River. Escaping your own reception? He asked, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. Just taking a moment. Remembering. She leaned into him. A year ago, I was desperate and alone and convinced I'd never be anything but struggling. And now. Now I have everything. My father's healthy. I have architecture projects that actually matter. The sustainable housing development had gotten full funding after Alexei's casual mentions to investors. And I have you. This brilliant, stubborn man who taught me that sometimes the best things come from the worst beginnings. The best things, Alexei agreed, turning her to face him. You know what my grandmother used to say. Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. I spent so long trying to control everything, plan everything, eliminate every variable that could hurt me. And then you climbed into my carefully planned life and disrupted everything. Are you complaining? I'm grateful. He kissed her forehead. Because you're right. We had the worst beginning. A transaction born from mutual desperation. But we built something real from that flawed foundation. And maybe that's actually more valuable than if we'd met some perfect way. Because we know exactly how much we fought to be here. Music drifted from inside, something slow, romantic. Alexei held out his hand. Dance with me? As my actual wife this time. Aino took his hand, and they swayed together on the small balcony while snow fell and the medieval town glowed with Christmas lights. His arms around her, her head on his chest, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat matching hers. No regrets, he murmured. None. You? Only that I wasted 34 years not knowing you existed. Aino pulled back enough to look at him. We found each other when we were ready. Maybe that's what your grandmother knew, that you needed to be broken open before you could let someone in. And I needed to be desperate enough to take a risk I would have refused otherwise. So she was wise and manipulative. The best people usually are. Aino smiled. Thank you, by the way. For what? For fighting for us. For not letting me walk away. For believing we were worth the risk when I was too scared to see it. Thank you for coming back, Alexei said. For choosing me not once, but twice. For teaching me that love isn't the weakness I always thought it was, it's the greatest strength anyone can have. They stood there as evening turned to night, two people who'd started as a transaction and become a testament to the transformative power of choosing someone every single day. Ready to go inside. Aino finally asked. They'll miss us. In a minute. Alexei held her tighter. I just want to remember this. The moment before we go back to real life. Before bills and work and all the ordinary things. Right now, in this moment, everything is perfect. Everything is perfect, Aino agreed. And it'll still be perfect tomorrow. And the day after. Because we're choosing it to be. They returned to their reception hand in hand, greeted by cheers and laughter and the warmth of people who'd watched them fight their way to happiness. And as the evening stretched into celebration, Aino felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not since before her mother died, before the debt, before desperation defined her life. She felt complete. Not because Alexei completed her, she'd always been whole on her own. But because he'd helped her remember that being whole didn't mean being alone. That strength wasn't refusing to need people. That the bravest thing anyone could do was risk being hurt in pursuit of something worth having. What would you risk for a love that transforms you? And would you have the courage to choose it again and again, even when fear whispers that running would be easier? 1 year later. The sustainable housing development in Lapland was nearly complete. 20 modular units designed by Aino, funded by a coalition of investors that Alexei had somehow assembled, built to withstand Arctic winters while remaining affordable for families who needed them most. Aino stood in the snow, watching construction crews put finishing touches on the final building, and felt a pride that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with purpose. They're beautiful. Alexei appeared beside her, 2 thermoses of coffee in hand. Even here, hundreds of kilometers north of Helsinki, he'd found a way to bring comfort. They're functional, Aino corrected, but she was smiling. Beautiful is a bonus. You're beautiful. The buildings are just an extension of that. That's terrible logic. It's love logic. Different from regular logic. He handed her a thermos. The families start moving in next month. 20 families who wouldn't have had adequate housing otherwise. Because of you. Because of us, Aino corrected. You funded this. I wrote checks. You designed hope. Alexei pulled her close, and they stood together in the crystalline cold. Speaking of which, I have news. Good news or complicated news? Both. He looked almost nervous. Nordic Tech is launching a new division, sustainable technology for developing regions. And I'd like you to head the architecture component. Design housing, community centers, infrastructure that balances environmental needs with human requirements. Real work that actually helps people. Aino stared at him. Alexei, I don't have experience with. You have exactly the right experience. You understand sustainability, human needs, and how to create something beautiful from limitations. Plus, he grinned, that real smile that still made her heart skip. Your boss would be very understanding if you needed flexible hours. For, say, family reasons. Family reasons. Well. Alexei's hand moved to her still flat stomach. If we were, hypothetically, expecting a baby in 7 months, your boss would absolutely support parental leave. Hypothetically. Aino's breath caught. They'd been trying for 3 months, hoping, but she hadn't wanted to test yet. Hadn't wanted to hope too much. How do you? I saw the pregnancy test in the bathroom trash. This morning. 3 positive tests, actually, which suggests someone needed to be very sure. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. We're having a baby, Aino. We're going to be parents. She was crying and laughing and kissing him, there in the Lapland snow with unfinished buildings bearing witness to their joy. We're having a baby. Oh God, we're having a baby. Terrifying, right? Absolutely terrifying. Aino pulled back to look at him. Are you ready for this? For the mess and chaos and complete loss of control that comes with a child? No, Alexei admitted. But I wasn't ready for you either. And look how that turned out. They held each other as snow fell softly around them, 2 people who'd started as a carefully planned transaction and become the beautiful mess of real love. Soon they'd be 3. Then maybe more. A family built from the most unlikely foundation, proving that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never planned for. I love you, Aino whispered. Thank you for offering me $50 million for a fake marriage. Alexei laughed, the sound echoing across the snowy landscape. Thank you for being desperate enough to accept. Best investment I ever made. That's not romantic. It's honest. And honesty is our foundation now. He kissed her softly. I love you. Not because a contract said I should. Not because my grandmothers will require it. I love you because you're you, stubborn, brilliant, compassionate, brave. You're the disruption that saved my life. You saved mine first. Then we're even. They stood together in the Arctic cold, surrounded by buildings that represented hope, carrying within them a future they'd created together. And Aino thought about how far they'd come, from that sterile office where Billionaire had offered her $50 million to that small church in Porvoo where they'd chosen each other for real to this moment, where they were building not just structures but a life. A real life. An honest life. A beautiful, complicated, worth fighting for life. Come on, Alexei said finally, tugging her toward the car. Let's go home. We have a nursery to plan, baby names to argue about, and approximately 7 months to figure out how two control freaks raise a human being. This is going to be a disaster, Aino said cheerfully. Absolutely. Alexei grinned. I can't wait. They drove south toward Helsinki as twilight painted the snow purple and gold, two people who'd learned that love wasn't about perfection or control or carefully managed expectations. Love was about choosing someone flawed and being chosen back. About building something real from honest materials, even when those materials started as lies. Love was about transformation, not despite the mess, but because of it. And as the aurora borealis began to dance across the darkening sky, Aino rested her hand on her stomach where their child grew and thought, this is what your great-grandmother wanted, Alexei. Not a transaction that looked like love, but love that learned to exist despite starting as a transaction. She knew what she was doing all along. And somewhere, Aino liked to imagine, Helmi-Lotti was smiling, satisfied that her stubborn, brilliant grandson had finally learned the most important lesson of all. That the greatest wealth wasn't measured in billions, but in the courage to be vulnerable with someone who chose to be vulnerable back. That home wasn't a glass fortress, but wherever you were with someone who saw your worst and loved you anyway. That the best investments weren't in companies or real estate, but in people, messy, complicated, absolutely worth it people. Alexei reached over and took Aino's hand, lacing their fingers together as they drove through the Arctic night toward home. Toward their future. Toward everything they'd fought for and won. Together. Have you ever had something in your life that started as a necessity or obligation, but transformed into something you couldn't imagine living without? How did that transformation change you? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how unexpected beginnings led to beautiful endings in your life. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't the ones that start perfectly. They're the ones where two broken people choose to heal together, where desperation transforms into devotion, and where a transaction becomes a testament to the power of choosing love again and again, even when it's terrifying. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, and vulnerability over protection. Because sometimes the fakest beginnings lead to the realest endings. And that's the most honest magic of all. Thanks for watching till the end. We know you loved this story, and there are many more thrilling ones waiting for you. Just click on the video on your screen to dive into the next chapter.